Welcome a weary traveller to the land of a spaghetti bolognese. I am your host, Dante Alighieri alla Vinci Scolamalello. Join me, my friend, as we enter into the third circle of Hellfire, where we meet those who have too much of my mama's bolognese, otherwise known as the fatties.
She keeps me warm in the winter, shady in the summertime. That's what I like about that fat gal of mine.
You're right, boys and sweet women. Welcome back to the third circle of Dante's Hell. We are continuing our descent down into the dark, murky depths, deep into the human shadow. And of course, we realise by now that what Dante is doing with his poem is not imposing an arbitrary Christian dogma on people. It is not a will-to-power struggle against other belief systems, but it is instead age-old wisdom that has been harnessed over a very long period of time, otherwise known as common sense, to keep you and me happy, healthy, and sane, and away from hellfire, essentially. So today's sin of choice, which Dante alluded to a second ago, is the sin of gluttony. Now, gluttony is a sin. I think gluttony is not a very romantic sin. It's not like the last one, sexual sin, where people are, they're all struggling with their sexual sin. You got the young no-fap guys, and you got the people who are like, I feel empty after being left having a one-night stand and all this stuff, and they're wondering why. Well, gluttony is just as serious, if not more so, as Dante puts it, because I think there are two types of gluttony, and the way I'm approaching this poem is abstracting things out from it. So what Dante meant originally in his poem was the sin of physical gluttony. That is, filling yourself with shit, essentially. The image comes to mind, of course, of like Henry VIII with his fucking pheasant's leg in one hand and his tankard of wine in the other, and he's roaring at people. And he's got his own arse wiper as well. That was an actual job in Tudor England, by the way. People would wipe the king's arse. And when he died, there were rumours that sprung up after him that he blew up in his coffin because he had so much lard. He was such a fatty bomb, as they say. So there's that type of gluttony, and we're dealing with an obesity crisis, so it is definitely a pertinent sin. But on the other hand, you've got mental gluttony, right? Because if you can fill yourself physically with shit, surely you can also fill yourself mentally with shit, because the body is the mind and all this stuff. And I think this is an interesting one, because I'm quite an open individual, technically on the Big Five scale. And I imagine you also are if you're watching this, or else why else would you be here? And being open to ideas, I think, means that the world of possibilities of things which you can consume and experience magnifies ad infinitum. So what that means is, there's lots of meals I can go around and eat. I'll take some of this and some of this and some of this. And there's no way, if you're a young, curious boyo, there's no real hierarchy of pertinence built into that, right? It's purely I'm going to eat as much as I possibly can. Consume. And a lot of that is going to be filling yourself with shit, either because it's poison or because it's too much. You get left with, this is what Nietzsche talked about. He's like, when I read the Bible, I just get bad digestion, boys. I can't take it. Which is an interesting health metaphor that he was using, right? So I'm going to be talking about both of these today. And of course, Dante is the one who's going to be talking about it. He's going to walk you through why gluttony itself is bad and what the punishment for gluttony is. And it's quite a sophisticated one. Not as obvious to figure out as previous punishments, but it's a very interesting one. So, Dante, my friend, take it away. When consciousness returned, after the darkening caused by my pity for the two kinsfolk, which made me so sad that I was stunned, I saw then, all around me, fresh torments, and tormented spirits I had not seen before. As I moved on, turning this way and that, and looking, I was in the third circle, where it rains eternally, icily, and implacably. Weight and direction are invariable. Great hailstones, muddy water, mixed with snow, fall through the darkened air without respite. They rot the ground they fall upon, and it stinks. Oh man, it's getting a bit chilly in here, don't you think? Lots of cold, icy rain falling down from the heavens, or from the hells. I don't know which way round that you would say that. Okay, so we've now moved into the third circle of hell. Interestingly, immediately what he says is, alright boys, I was knocked out, I've woken up now, and I'm remembering back to what happened last time. And interestingly, he describes Francesca and Paolo from the last video as the two kinsfolk. That's all he says about them. He just says the two kinsfolk, and it made me sad. Now that's, again, quite an interesting thing to sort of expand on. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but you can sort of figure that out. In the previous canto, Dante was obsessed with these two characters, and he really sympathized with their pain, because life is incredibly difficult. They're fighting against their natural urges, and that is almost built into the Christian worldview in a way, is that your urges and your instincts are kind of a bad thing, because they lead you down to hell. But now he's calling them kinsfolk. Well, why? It's like, okay, he's now woken up and he's realized reality for what it is. He's gone to sleep and he's woken up again. So he's almost processed what's happened. And now he's like, yeah, like, I know it was sad, but tough. Get on with it. This is life. It's almost a new attitude he has at the dawning of consciousness in a new day. He can't be too attached emotionally to the past. So I thought that was quite interesting. But as I've alluded to earlier, this is about gluttony, and so we immediately see what the punishment is. And he says there is an internally, icily and implacably, there's rain falling down, hailstones, muddy water, snow, and it hits the ground and it stinks. So that's your punishment. So you can imagine me lying on my back or whatever, and all these hailstones coming in and smashing it into me. That's my punishment. And that's not an obvious one to figure out, because the punishments in the Inferno are meant to either be just punishments for what you've done, that you deserve it, this is your load to carry, or it's a mental state of mind. And I think that this is really spot on. I didn't get this straight away. I had to really think about this, but it's something like, when you're a glutton for something, you do desire something so much that's not good for you, that's what defines gluttony, then what happens? Well, you're left cold. You're crushed by what leaves you cold. Something like that, right? Very, very, very clever of him to put that in there. Or I'm just putting this nonsense on top. But I think that's what it means. So I actually want to approach this neurologically, actually. Because what happens in the brain when you go after some kind of stimulation? So we'll combine mental and physical gluttony into one for a second. Well, if I'm going after a Big Mac, or if I'm going after, that new YouTube video that just came out, or something like that, or oh my god, the new iPhone comes out, I'm going to camp outside, or the new Star Wars film, I'm going to camp outside for 6 days before it even launches. I need this. What are you doing to your brain? What you're doing is you're just giving into your dopaminergic system. So dopamine, of course, is what manages your motivation. If you're motivated to go and do something, like motivated to go to the gym, which is a good thing, or if you're motivated to go eat a Big Mac, perhaps not the greatest thing on planet Earth, then that's dopamine that hooks you into it. But what happens when you're obsessed with something is you end up essentially, what would you say, drained, I guess the word is. You're left cold by the thing. And of course, like a wolf, like we saw in the very, very first canto, which is a spoiler for what's about to come up, you're left almost like ravenously hungry. You're always trying to go after the same thing. So you get a boost of dopamine, you get a boost of serotonin, you get a boost of oxytocin because the Big Mac made me feel happy, or the video on YouTube made me feel happy. You get that, and then it dies off again. And then you go for it again and again and again and again. But what are you doing if you look at it abstractly? You're walking in to a huge, what do you say, a rainstorm that's smashing into you. You're moving through and you're like, I still want it. I still freaking want it. But it's going to leave you cold and shivering at the end of it. And there's nothing really left of you. You're crushed by it. And Dante, interestingly, says, you're smashed to the floor and the rain is hitting you and you're left stinking. The ground is stinking. Well, why? Well, because it stinks. That's why. The activity that you're doing leaves a dirty smell in the air. There's poor taste to what you're doing. Something like that. And that is what you're doing. It's a very, very pertinent punishment, I think. But enough on that. Let's go in and see who the gatekeeper is for this particular canto. Cerberus, a cruel and outlandish beast, barks like a dog from his 3 throats at those who, under that downpour, are there submerged. His eyes are red, his beard greasy and black, his belly huge and his fingers are clawed. He scratches the spirits, skins them, pulls them to bits. They howl like dogs, the rain so batters them, with nothing to shelter one flank but the other, the irreligious twist in their misery. When Cerberus, the great dragon, saw us, he opened his mouths wide and showed his fangs. He shivered, and no part of him was still. My guide then stopped, and opened his hands wide, gathered up earth, and then, his 2 fists full, he threw the lot down those rapacious throats. Like a dog who barks when he wants food, and quietens when he gets his teeth into it, fighting and straining only in order to eat. So was it with the filthy muzzles of Cerberus, the demon who so battered the eardrums of those spirits that they would like to have been death if they could. I don't know about you, but that reminded me of Kingdom Hearts. I don't know if you've played Kingdom Hearts or not. The third one came out relatively recently. Decent game, but the first one is better. Where the Cerberus is one of these bosses, and he's a very, very difficult boss. So I got sort of like PTSD flashbacks when I was reading that. But immediately, we see this idea of this character of Cerberus, who is, in Greek mythology, this 3-headed dog. He's kind of the pet of Hades, and he prowls around. And he's got 3 heads. The most famous Cerberus that I guess modern people are aware of is that of Fluffy from the Harry Potter series. He's that dark thing that guards what's in the deep. And maybe there's something good down at the very bottom. Like in the Harry Potter stories, down at the very bottom is the key of eternal life, right? This philosopher's stone idea. And that's built into that. It's quite a nice philosophy, which is if you're looking for it, you're not going to find it, which is cool. Whereas at the bottom of the human shadow, or in other words, hell, is also that key to promise and eternal life, right? You can only transcend up to the heavens if you die first. You go down and then up. It's the classic sort of Phoenix story. So Cerberus is there and he's guarding things. But why him to guard this particular canto? Well, Cerberus is a dog, okay? And dogs are ravenously hungry. In fact, I noticed this with my dog the other day. I thought it was really funny. I was eating my dinner or whatever, and he was sitting there. Oh, he was actually standing there, and his tail was down, right? And he was staring at the food. And every time I pick up the food and put it in my mouth, he would just like watch it. And then once I close my mouth over the food, he'd go, no, I wasn't looking at that, no. And then he goes and looks back at the plate again. He's a border collie. He's really, really clever. And I said to my fiance, I was like, why is his tail down, do you think? And she actually looked it up on Google and was like, border collies' tails go down when they see something important. So he obviously thought that my salmon and my potato was very, very important, the most pertinent thing in the world. But that is the metaphor for what a person who is obsessed with filling themselves with stuff is like. It's like my dog who finds something and goes, important, I want it, I want it. Right? And another metaphor here as well, Dante, he obviously says that you're left stinking. Well, what happens when you get a dog wet? They stink, right? So it's another metaphor built on top of that. You're just a wet dog running around. And so Virgil, he doesn't really seem fazed by this. He's kind of like, all right, I know how to handle this. This is fine. So he picks up some stuff from the ground and throws it into those rapacious throats in this particular translation. So he knows how to get past this ravenously hungry entity by just allowing it to eat. He's like, yeah, it's fine. It's only angry with you because it wants to eat. And that's just like somebody else. If they don't get their fix of whatever the hell they're after, be that food or be that their mental stimulation, this is why a dopamine detox is really hard. Have you seen people who try and do, it's impossibly difficult. I'm not going to pretend to be a virtuous moral high ground boyo here, but where they cut out all technology, they cut out all stimulation and everything. It's really, really painful. You get irritable and moody. Like withdrawal symptoms leave you angry and irritable. You're not yourself anymore. You get possessed by that spirit of Cerberus, which is just ravenously hungry. So he's like, I'm just going to fill your throat with stuff, boy, and then you're going to be fine. And then they move on. And he's not really much of a challenge. So Dante's about to meet a very interesting character. And if you're interested in Florentine politics, a la 1302, then you're going to enjoy this next section. Or if you just want to see people burning in hell, you're also going to enjoy this next section. We passed over the shadows which were beaten under the heavy rain. We put the soles of our feet down on the empty shapes, which looked like bodies. They lay upon the ground, strewn here and there, all except one of them, who sat up quickly when he saw us passing not far from him. "Oh, you who are conducted through this hell," he said to me, "acknowledge me if you know me. You were full grown before I was unmade." And I said to him, "The anguish which you suffer is perhaps such you are not recognizable. At least, it seems to me I never saw you. But tell me who you are, put in this place which is so dreary that, if perhaps other penalties are more severe, none could be more displeasing." He answered me, "Your native city, which is full of envy, till it is busting at the seams, was mine too, when I was in the open world. Your citizens called me by the name of Kiako, for the pernicious fault of gluttony. As you see now, the rain flattens me here. And I, unhappy spirit, am not alone. All these suffer the self-same penalty for the same fault." And then he said no more. I answered him, "Kiako, your exhaustion and distress weigh on me heavily, and call up tears, but tell me if you know what will become of those citizens of the divided city. Will there be one just man? And tell me why it has been troubled by so much dissension." He said to me, "After an age of squabbles, they will come to bloodshed, and the provincial party will drive the other out and do it viciously, after which that party is bound to fall within 3 summers, and the others come out on top with the help of one who keeps an ambiguous course. The other party will rule the roost for years, keeping its rival down with heavy exhortations, however great the tears and indignation. There are 2 who are just, and no one listens to them. Pride and envy and avarice are the sparks which set the hearts of the people alight." With that, he ended his distressful utterance, and I said to him, "I should like further instruction, if you will be so good as to tell me more. Farinata and Tekiaho, who were so excellent, Jacopo Rusticucci, Arago and Mosca, and the others who set their minds on doing well. Please tell me, where are they now, that I may know them? For I have the greatest desire to understand. Does heaven delight them, or does hell embitter them?" And he said, "They are among the blackest souls, for various faults have dragged them further down. If you go lower, you will be able to see them, but when you are once more in the sweet world, recall to me the memory of men. I say no more. Expect no further answer." Okay, so we've just met Chiaco, or Chiaco. I don't know how to do Italian words. I have absolutely no idea. I'm pretty sure it's short for something as well. Now, this is a character that we don't really know much about historically. I've tried Googling him. We know nothing about him, except that he was a well-to-do Florentine who was a nice young man, but he kept eating too many Big Macs, and so he was kind of screwed. Okay, well, I also want to say something about the previous Cerberus thing. I just thought of something. When Virgil, who represents that godlike human element of mankind, he throws that stuff down Cerberus's throat, that's a metaphor again for the god side of man being in control, and more importantly, knowing how to tame that hungry side of you. And that's cool, because it means that even if you're in the dark depths of your shadow, implicitly you do have the ability and you do have the knowledge to be able to trap this thing, but you might not be strong enough, or you might not have your path aligned on the right path. Maybe that's what you need, but you are still capable. So built into that is kind of an implicit hope that's kind of sweet. So something that Chiaco says, or it's something that Dante says even to Chiaco is, who are you? Who are you, my friend? And why are you here dealing with this penalty? None could be more displeasing, is one of the first things he says. And that's interesting. Displeasing as a word for this. Why not hell? Why not pain? Because if you've experienced pain, you wouldn't really describe it as displeasing. Indeed, if you're out in a hailstorm, it's not really displeasing. So what's Dante really saying here, unless he's trying to be well-mannered, a well-mannered persona in front of his well-mannered friend? Well, too much of a good thing is not a nice thing. When you have too much of a good thing, it's kind of a bit of a pain. What was once pleasing kind of really turns you off. Like if you eat to 90% of capacity, that last 10% of capacity is going to absolutely destroy you, right? So Chiaco then goes on a bit of a rant, and this is it's an interesting, confusing part of the canto, because it's not an obvious metaphor for self-improvement, right? But built into it is something quite interesting. So Dante set this poem in the year 1300. I think it begins on Good Friday. I don't know where people get this information from, by the way, but that's what everywhere on the internet tells me. So it's probably subtle references to days or whatever that I've not picked up on before in the poem. But he begins it in the year 1300. And then Dante died about 20 years later. So he is writing this set in the past. So he already knows what's going to happen to him in the future. Now, in 1302, something very interesting happens, and this is a really, really brief way of saying it, we'll just say the white side and the black side, because they were called the White Party and the Black Party, more or less, were fighting over Florence, and they were trying to see, okay, so where can we go with this? I want to be in control, you're the bad guys. Like we see today, you see Republicans and Democrats fighting with each other, and they go, you're evil, rather than, well, you're probably not evil, you're always going to be a Republican because that's your personality, that's your upbringing, that's your temperament. Maybe we need both of us to have a dialogue. Maybe. And same thing in England, you've got Tory and you've got Labour, and they just fight and then nothing happens. And you just get amusing compilation clips on YouTube of the House of Commons calling each other mean words and stuff like that. But what happened in 1302 was the White Party lost to the Black Party. It took them over. And Dante was a member of the White Party. And he was like, oh, okay, I don't like this very much. And he was exiled from Florence. He was kicked out of his beloved hometown, home city, basically. And he yearns to go back to Florence again. A quick aside, there is a bit of a fighting over where Dante's remains should be, because Florence only very recently was like, we love you, Dante, come home. And the place where he's really buried now is like, no, you're not having his body back. You exiled him, and it's all the way through his greatest work. So it was a huge tension, not within his own mind, but it was also in the world around him, within the kingdom, you could say. So now we can start to play with the idea of the archetype of the kingdom of God, which exists within all of us, right? We all have a dream to have a kingdom. And Christ came along and he said, these are all the things that you need to do to reach the kingdom of God. And most of the time, Christians would interpret that as, okay, I live a good life and then I get to reach a physical kingdom of God. And maybe that's true. I've absolutely no idea if that's true or not. But that's the canonical way of interpreting it. But the more psychological, alchemical, occult, you might say, that's a part of it. But the more sophisticated, complicated way of interpreting that is, well, the kingdom of God is a state of mind, because if we imagine ourselves as a kingdom, then we have barbarians knocking at the gate all the time, threat from the outside world, Mother Nature, Father Culture, it's always trying to destroy us. And from within us, we also have all of these problems. Like we got another motif within us of the hostile brothers, which is always fighting each other, which means that you're your own worst enemy. And that's, again, you can expand that across the entirety of the Inferno, because who's the one getting you to sin? Is it other people? Or is it you? Or more importantly, who has the last say? Because you can argue over that ad infinitum, essentially. So Dante, he's talking about both types of kingdom of God here. And what Chiaco is saying is, well, he goes into some of Dante's favourite politics involving the Pope and all these other things. I won't go into that. But he's saying that, will there be no good man to stand up and defend us? Are we screwed to this squabbling and fighting? And it's interesting that he puts that in this canto, not in another one. He puts it in the gluttonous one. And this is why I like the idea of filling yourself mentally with shit at the same time, because it doesn't make any sense if they were just eating food, right? It doesn't fit that particular sin why he would put it in. But it does make sense as they're ravenously hungry dogs. And they filled themselves with ideas and they filled themselves with ideologies. So they're all sort of puffed up like a pufferfish. They've eaten it, their stomachs have expanded, their brains have expanded, and they've got basically ego inflation. There's no humility. And they're just fighting with each other. And you can have appreciation that perhaps there is time for political urgency, but at the same time, not when it comes, or it's not the wisest thing to have the top layer of your kingdom fighting with each other. Why? Because you're just a ravenous dog. You just want power. You want to win. You want to validate all of your ideas. And he says, will there be no good man who stands up to defend us? And of course, this is a reference to Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abraham is there in front of God and he goes, please don't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. There's going to be good people in there. And God goes, tough shit, my little Abraham friend. And Abraham's like, okay, will you save this city if there's 100 good people in there? And he goes, I will save the city. What if there's 50 good people? Will you save the city? Yes, I will save the city. And he goes all the way down. I don't think he quite reaches 1, but he goes all the way down to a very small number. And God goes, yeah, I will spare it. If there is one good man, God will spare the kingdom. Because the one good man has the ability to save the kingdom. And that would be the equivalent of a Messiah type figure. It'd be the equivalent of a great man. It'd be the equivalent of a Julius Caesar or a Napoleon or a Christ or somebody like that standing up and going, God's going to destroy us. And everyone understands what that metaphor means. It's a really pertinent metaphor that unless you have your shit together and your kingdom together, you will be destroyed by something. And so that's what Kyako is warning here. And then Kyako, of course, goes on and mentions a few other people that Dante is familiar with and goes, you're not going to find them here, but you will find them deeper down in the circles of hell. And this is Dante essentially condemning Florence. Because he's already been exiled by this point. He's condemning it and going, there is no one good man. We might have a hope on the horizon. Dante did have an idea of a few hopes that he had, but there's some hope on the horizon, but we are not just in hell, we're way down at the bottom of hell, and we are doomed unless we do something about this. And I guess to lighten the mood before we move on, there's a character that Kyako mentions, or is it Dante? Yeah, Dante mentions Arrigo. We have no idea who Arrigo is. Like all the others, Tehihahio and Rusticucci and Mosca, we know who they are. They're just people, like Florentine boyos. But we have no idea who Arrigo is. It's a mystery lost to time. Just like in the first canto where there was that magical, was it the Panther, I think? The magical Black Panther that's going to save everything. We still have no idea what the Black Panther is. So there you go. Moving on to the final section of the poem. His eyes, which had looked straight, were now askew. He looked at me a little, then bent his head and fell with it among the other blind men. My guide said to me, he will not wake again until he hears the sound of the angel's trumpet at the arrival of the enemy power. Each one will see once more his bitter grave, will put on once again his flesh and shape, will hear what echoes through eternity. Thus, we passed through the filthy mixture of shadows and of rain, and with slow steps, talking a little about the future life. So I said to him, Master, will these torments grow greater still after the great sentence? Will they be less, or burn as they burn now? And his answer to me was, go back to your science, which teaches that the more perfect a thing is, the more it feels pleasure. And pain as well. Although these people, because they are accursed, will never reach the point of true perfection, they expect to approach it more nearly afterwards. We followed the road round a little further, talking of more things than I will repeat, and so we came to the place where it goes down. There we found Plutus, the great enemy. Dante is very good at getting us to think about things and think about what we're doing, and it's very useful and cute, and I think quite intelligent to use Dante's Inferno as a metaphor for how we can make ourselves better. because nobody wants to be a ravenous dog just going after the next big thing. Nobody wants to be lost in a whirlwind to our desires. Nobody wants to be stuck in a state of inaction. We need a will to power in order to live our lives with meaning. But that metaphor, which is quite Jordan Peterson-y in a way, it starts to burn off a little bit and starts to enter the realm of serious desperation where only the chosen few will pass. And the reason why is articulated very nicely here with a piece of Christian theology. And he also gets a little bit Gnostic with it as well. But he begins by talking about this Kyako bloke, and he moves on from Kyako, and he goes, well, this Kyako fell down as if, and fell with it among the other blind men. So Kyako, he's blind. He doesn't know where he's going. He can't see. And of course, you need vision to map out a path. You can't see your path forward to the promised land if you're blind. Okay, and that's easy to understand. But to really drill this in, and especially into my own head, this part really kind of freaked me out, because it stops being self-improvement fun and games. Like, oh well, I failed my streak on this, bro, or I messed up over here, bro. Virgil offers a really dire warning, and he says, "Go back to your science, young Dante." So Dante asks, "What's going to happen to these people at the end of time?" Basically. And Virgil says, go back to your science, which means Aristotle, okay? So we're basing this on Aristotle, but also basing this on Christian theology, Aquinas, because Aquinas, again, based a lot of his stuff on Aristotle. Kind of a blending of Christian and paganism within the Catholic Church, if you want to put it like that, though that's fairly crude. And Virgil basically says is, at the end of time, everything will be made perfect. So Christianity is like a linear path from the beginning of time to the end. And the end is a state of perfection. And what perfection means in an Aristotelian sense is fit for purpose, basically. So these headphones can be perfect headphones if they were, we can't really imagine what perfect headphones would be like, but it would be something like always plays the crispest sound that always leaves you feeling enraptured in jubilee towards the praise of the Lord. Something like that. There is a perfection there. And we know that there's a hierarchy of good enough headphones. But what's at the peak? We're not really sure. We're still moving forward to better and better headphones. When it comes to life in the Christian worldview, we reach a state of perfection. When you're a good person and you are in heaven, the idea is you reach paradise at the end of the earth. That your happiness and your state of peace, because that's the important part here, is peace rather than happiness, is magnified forever, ad infinitum. And that's perfect. And that's what everybody really desires deep down. Perhaps Dostoevsky has some critique of that with his idea of if everything was perfect, we'd just destroy it. So, there's some debate there, but that's the idea. But when it comes to hell, things also get perfect. So your punishment gets perfect. Things tick on and get more and more and more painful. And this is where I'm going to bring in my own experience with stuff with anxiety and with panic attacks. And when I was sat in a panic attack fairly recently, this just came out of the blue. I'm not really sure what caused it, but there was a real sense of overwhelming death and doom and chaos. And you're going to die. You're going to die painfully. You're going to die slowly. And your consciousness is going to slip away. And while you're doing it, you're going to go mad and blind and probably hurt other people. They were the thoughts going through my head. When you're in a state like that, you can call that hell. Because there is no light in the distance. All you have is a hope, right? So hell you could describe perhaps as worse than a panic attack. Because, again, Dante explained in the previous canto, this is where all your light that you can wish upon in the sky, all your prayers, is extinguished, so you're screwed. But it's interesting to think about that things are going to get worse, is the idea there. I'm going to tend towards death and madness and blindness and things nobody wants. And that's what Dante is saying, is when you're in the heat of that panic attack, when things you think are going to get really bad, Dante is saying, you're right. If you are not a morally squeaky clean human being. And that is a hypothesis. That's not something I can expand on and pretend like it's a genius insight into things. Because it's a hypothesis. We don't know what the future may hold. That's the problem with being bound by space and time. We're these 3, perhaps 4-dimensional beings, if you've got memory as well. So that's something worth considering is you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And you don't know what the full extent of your sin, quote unquote, is going to be. So if the words of Dante resonate with you, then perhaps it's worth considering, well, perhaps I shouldn't take it as kind of fun and games. This is fun. This is what we need to save Western civilization, because that's a meme going on. We need to save Western civilization. Yeah, maybe we do, but there are certain ways of going about it and not larping around all over the place pretending you're going to save the West when you're clearly not. Maybe this is more personal to you, that once you get a taste of hell, it's going to get so much worse unless you've prepared for it. Judgment Day is always here. But Judgment Day, for you, it might be right now. It might be tomorrow. It might be next week. It might be in a year's time. And I don't mean death, I mean Judgment Day, where suddenly the hammer comes down from the universe. And it says to you, you, because of your mistakes, are going to go way further, all the way down. So, taking the example of gluttony, you've eaten so much food over the course of your life that you've gotten fat. And what happens then? Well, you start to get diseases, right? You start to get atherosclerosis. I've not used that word in a long time. And you start, so furring of the arteries. You get things like heart disease. You get like neuropathic pain. Everything starts to break down because of systemic inflammation. And then once the doctor gives you that diagnosis of you've got X serious illness, that's it. Now, we can fight against God, if you like, with medicine, and lots of time there is. So that might not be the doom moment, but that's it. It's like you, because of your choices, have brought yourself here. And I'm not trying to be an Old Testament prophet here and condemning people for their sins, but it is a message that needs to be in people's heads. It needs to be in my head. It took me a long time to sort of realize this, and maybe I'm still struggling with it. But we need to understand this so that we don't cross over too far when Judgment Day comes. And what about filling your mental health with, your mental state with shit? Here's an example for you. Lots of young guys get sucked into the red pill, like the Rollo Tomassi, whatever, red pill movement, which I would describe it as it's pop evolutionary psychology, right? Where it's women have a certain nature, men have a certain nature, so to play this game, you have to act a certain way if you want to breed with women and not be destroyed by women. And that's fun and games. But the problem is the red pill guys are playing with deep archetypes, the great mother and the great father, masculine and feminine energies. So those energies have a tendency to erupt in people's brains. So it's not the fault of people who are in charge of this, it's merely the nature of the archetypes they're playing with. So what happens if you get sucked into one of these movements? You can apply this to any movement, if you like. Feminism, if you like, is another one. Well, what could that do? Well, it might stop you finding the person who you are, and maybe I'm a romantic, meant to spend the rest of your life with, because you're there thinking to yourself, women don't want me this way, I've got to repress these parts of my personality, I can't act like this way, women are whatever. And then what have you done? You've missed out on all these opportunities. Judgment Day comes and goes because of what you did, down you go. And again, the same thing with feminism. You fall into feminism. Not all women who are feminists, because it's a strange, loose, vague term that doesn't really mean anything. But let's take the typical feminist woman who, because of that ideology, it skews her relationship with men. Okay, so what does that mean? Again, the same thing. That man who you were meant to spend your life with, those opportunities perhaps that were meant to be gifted to you, a chance to receive love that might later on down the line really you can really use as a rock for yourself, you've lost. You don't have that protection. So the world and all of its pains and ills can come and smash into you. So what Dante is suggesting in this is a very sophisticated philosophy here of everything that you do matters. Everything that you consume becomes a part of you. So be careful with what you're doing, because otherwise it will, not it might, it will lead to a climax, which is Judgment Day. And that's very, very exciting. So on a slightly happier note, we can take Dante as a beautiful piece of poetry. We can all appreciate it. But at the same time, maybe have an appreciation for these deeper messages that go on within it. So thank you, everybody, for watching today's episode of Dante's Inferno. If you have enjoyed it, please share it on MySpace, and please share it on Bebo and all the other platforms everyone else uses. And if you'd like to, check out the Patreon down below. I've said this before, but you've got too much money, so give it to me and Stefan so that we can waste it for you. But in seriousness, we have a whole bunch of things down there where you can come and chat to us, and we can chat to you, and we can start building a network of boyos to take over the Western world, to save Western civilization by standing on soapboxes and reading Dante's Inferno to them. So thank you, everybody. Namaste, if that's the correct term, and I'll see you next time.